Good morning, Ray.
Good morning, George, and good morning, everybody.
Why don't you show us how you program this thing? I could use a little instruction myself.
Well, George, you're like a lot of the users. They have one or two memory channels programmed in, one for analog, one for D-Star, and they're perfectly happy. And you'd be surprised at how many people are just like that.
Well, I understand that my idea of programming it is not exactly correct, and you've got some shortcuts and some tips here on how to get the most out of it.
Well, over the years of the D-Star evolution, when it first came out, folks would just program certain memory channels to do certain things. But as more and more repeaters get out there, more and more third-party stuff to make D-Star do what they want it to do has really changed the way a lot of people would operate the radio. And it then becomes confusing when you have to relearn the second time, and then now some are relearning for the third time on navigating through a D-Star system.
So we might as well start with learning it right the first time, huh?
Okay, well, I'll be glad to take you guys through that. Let's look at a couple of analog things. What I'm going to do is I'm going to program a memory channel for 146520 simplex, and then also put the alphanumeric tag. The very first thing that I would do right now, we're in DVG, and that would be to change it to FM. But to do that, you push and hold the knob, and it says DV. There's AM narrow for receive, AM for receive, FM narrow. Some of the repeaters are going to narrow, 12.5, and then regular FM. Then I just touch the button again. Now, I could do one of two things. I can either dial over to 146520 or use the keypad. The first button you'd hit would be the C, which is ENT. It will blank out the screen. Then 146520. You don't have to hit anything else. It fully entered it into that location. So now we are in 146520. One thing that might be a little confusing is we notice here it says mid FM.
Yeah. What does mid mean?
Mid is the power setting. So we're on mid power. If we use the microphone again, just hitting the high button removes the mid. Then mid or low, back to high power. Located on the outer edge right here, it says S.MW. The S is select and MW is memory right. So we just touch it, select memory right, then we turn the dial to whatever memory channel we want. So let's say we want it all the way at the very end. I think we're going to roll over from 999 to 0A. And these memory channels are your scan edges. So you can scan between 144 to 148. This one's 430 to 450. So let's go ahead and put this one at 999. Now, if I just wanted to program that and that was it, I would hit push and hold the SMW. But I don't want to just do that. I want to come here. I can select which bank to put it in. So on the screen we got clear, arrow out, arrow in, and then enter. I want to go deeper into it. I can then select which bank. We go to, let's say we're going to put it in G00. I'll hit the enter. You can then select what number in the bank and then enter again. Then I can go to the bank name where I can do, I hope Joe Walsh doesn't get mad because I'm going to name this one analog. Enter. Then I can go down to memory name, enter in, and then simplex. The simplex. And then enter again. And you can see we're in there. We can go back out of enter it. If I wanted to skip in my scan list, and then we push and hold. And this is a magical tone you want to hear when you do that. That like did it. So now, when we go into the M/call, we'll go into memory. There it shows up simplex. And we've got other memory channels. There's one that would show just the frequency, and it's set up for DV mode. So now that we've done the memory channel, and it's very similar to doing that for the D-Star channel. The magic occurs in D-Star with the call signs. Since it was based on amateur radio, everybody loves using their call signs to identify who they are. Well, D-Star takes it one step farther and allows you to use call signs to either talk to somebody or as control commands for your repeater. Right now we're in FM, push and hold, select DV, we'll come back out. Now we come up to the top and hit the set menu. And this one, because we've been using it a lot on D-Star, we go right to the call signs. As you see, we've got the enter button as well as to go into, meaning going deeper into the menu. And then we can come back out hitting this button, which now has the cursor to come back out. So we go in and it says UR. The UR command is where you're wanting to talk to. So we'll go down one level more. I've got a few already programmed in. It's flashing right now. The very first one, we'll come back out. The very first one is U. For a lot of the repeaters, they have reflectors. The command U in the 8th character will unlink the repeater.
And so you don't have to have a frequency or call sign or anything with that unlink command. You can just simply use a U.
Well, the call signs are used regardless of what frequency. So these are like scratch pads or even phone numbers at that point, like if you want to look at your cell phone. Your cell phone, the phone number is regardless of the frequency or whatever cell tower you're on. So we've got a few of them programmed. We've got one that's CQ, CQ, CQ. And then the I command, if you ping your repeater or kerchunk your repeater, if it's running D+, it will give you a verbal command back on the status of the repeater. If it's not linked, sometimes it'll say unlinked, or it would have a custom message that somebody might have put in there. This command is to link the reflector. My call sign, if somebody wanted to use this to talk to me. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use number 6 and put your call sign in, George. Okay. Much like what we did with the memory channels, we use the buttons to go deeper in. So now we're in edit mode. And all I do is W, 5, J, D, X. And you notice I went in both directions. Yeah. Sometimes it's easier to go clockwise to get to a letter and go counterclockwise to get to a number or a letter that's higher up in the alphabet. Now, that's pretty much it. All I do is I hit enter. So now that's in the your call memory number 6. We have RPT1 and RPT2. One of the cool things about D-Star, and I use this analogy with the analog repeaters. A lot of analog repeaters have tones on them. Yeah. If you don't know somebody that can give you the tone on it, you have to wait for the repeater to transmit, and if it's transmitting the tone, you can capture it. If not, you got to listen on the input and tone scan for somebody transmitting to the repeater. Well, with D-Star, all you got to do is have the frequency programmed in the offset, kerchunk the repeater, and the repeater will see that you do not have the call signs programmed right. It will then transmit back to the radio and send the call sign to the repeater, and it will capture it at least in RPT1. So we'll see what we've got here in RPT1. RPT1 has our repeater, N7IH, and we'll scroll across, and we've got port B, which is going to be a 440 frequency for us. RPT2 has N7IH, and then the letter G. We're going to use the gateway. So we've already got that pre-programmed in. If you kerchunk the repeater in RPT2 already has been used on a gateway and it has the G in there, it will overwrite just the repeater call sign portion of it, and the G will stay.
Okay. That makes sense. So repeater 1 and repeater 2, do you have to have both of those programmed to make a call, or just one or the other?
Well, it depends on what you want to do. RPT1 is always going to be your Gozenta. So it's going to be the call sign of the repeater and the repeater module you're going into. But RPT2 does a little bit of magic with D-Star. If you put, like, if we had N7IH and a letter C in the 8th character, I would go in on 440 and then crossband out on 2 meters, and I would just stay local on that repeater. But since I've got the G in there, that means go to the gateway, and I can talk on the global network at that point. Then finally, the last one is my call. Oh, you've been using this one, George. There's your call sign. I've got my call in there as well. You've got up to 6 my calls. So if you've got a family riding in the car with you, each one of them can use their own call sign. So that's got the call signs programmed. Now, I was talking about the older way of doing it. A lot of people would have all of these call signs programmed into a specific memory channel. And then they would have the alphanumerics of what that command did. Link to 30 Charlie, unlink to 30 Charlie. The thing is, if you stay on the same repeater, you're using multiple memory channels with the same frequency. So you manipulating the call signs to do what you want to makes it a lot easier. So it defaults to the your call. And the first thing that I would do is I would use the letter I would kerchunk the repeater to see if it's linked to anything. If it is linked to something and I don't want to use that, I would quickly go to CQ, 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 key up the repeater, identify, and ask to unlink. And if no one objected, then I would come here to your call again, use the U, kerchunk the repeater, and then I would hear back that the repeater is unlinked. And I like hanging it out on reflector 30 Charlie. I would go here, kerchunk the repeater, and it would then respond back to me that the link has been made. And then the final step would be go CQ, 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 and then talk to the folks that are on that reflector.
And CQ, 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 because I'm not trying to talk to one particular person, but just to that reflector. Is that correct?
That is correct. Now, if I just wanted to talk to you, George, I would do the I to see if it was linked, and this is what we call reflector etiquette. Check to see if the reflector's linked. If it is, unlink it. Then I would come over here and go to that memory channel where you are, enter it. My RPT1 would be my repeater. My RPT2 would say go to the gateway. And then my call would be N9JA. You could talk to yourself, and it would route back to your same repeater, but you'd never hear it because you're talking at the same time you're listening.
That happens a lot, not on D-Star.
Where you just sit there and talk to yourself? Yeah. I do that as well.
So now you would just kerchunk it, and the machine would just hunt me down wherever I am.
Yes, sir. Well, I wouldn't just kerchunk it. I would N9JA, W5JDX, George, are you out there? And the gateway would look into one of the lookup tables and see where the last repeater that you were occupying, and it would route that call back to where you were. So if you've been playing on the D-Star repeaters out here, when you get back home, kerchunk the repeater, and it will then identify your call sign back at your repeater in Jackson, Mississippi.
Okay. So I don't have to worry about programming in the repeater itself. It's going to find it if I just kerchunk on that frequency.
Yes, sir. It will. And the reason that you have to do the manual step is with amateur radio, we're responsible for what we transmit. They really don't do a whole lot with automatic transmission, so the radio itself can't do like your cell phone and sit there and handshake with all the different repeaters or cell sites that it goes through. So that's one of the differences that we have to do in amateur radio.
So now you're programming inside of the call fields here, the different reflectors, repeaters, and people you want to talk to rather than put them in memory channels. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that allows me to be more efficient with my memory channels, so I can have whatever I want to scan or listen to in there instead of occupying it with, I think right now there's almost 70 different reflectors out there, and each reflector has port A, B, C, D, and E. So you can easily hog all the memory channels by programming it that way to have all the different reflectors. And this style of using the call signs is pretty much what we introduced with the ID31, the 51. You now have it in the 7100 and the 5100 under the DR mode.
Okay, so how many channels can I store in there in the call signs here?
In the call signs, in the your call, there's up to 60, or 61 if you go with absolute 00.
And there again, this is who I'm wanting to talk to. This is not the repeater. My repeater is stored over in my regular memory channels. Is that correct?
That is correct.
On the radio here, there's DV mode, but there's also a DR mode on here. What's the difference between those two?
Well, the DR mode was first introduced in the ID880H and the IC80AD. And that was to the first generation of trying to make D-Star a little bit easier to understand and to navigate through. The DR is actually used in the DV mode. But the DR, the concept is you make one setting for where you're talking from and the other setting of where you're talking to. When it was first developed, though, Japan wasn't using a lot of the third-party software that's all over the world right now. The most common one is D+. D+ wants you to use CQ, CQ, CQ in the your call field. Well, the way D-Star was implemented, CQ, CQ, CQ is basically screaming in the middle of the world for somebody to answer, and that really didn't follow some of the understanding of or what it was being used. So the first generation of DR never really took off that well. But when we introduced it in the 31, where you could individually change the to and the from, and the repeater still tries to change the RPT2 back to local, because CQ, CQ, CQ is more of a local call. The 31, 51, and 5100 and 7100 now allows you in the DR mode to ignore the command to reprogram.
So that's why I hear Tommy talking about the DR mode so much, is because he's using those radios.
Yes. George, I'm going to use the 5100 to show the DR mode because it's a lot easier, and right now it's still a little busy, so I'm only going to turn on one side. This is what the DR mode looks like in a 31, 51, 7100, and the 5100. You notice we got to and from on the screen.
Yeah, that makes good sense there.
Okay, right now we're in Canada. Let's go ahead and touch the from. Touch it again. I can go repeater list or near repeater using the GPS. The near repeater, with the 5100 we've included FM. But let's go ahead and just search for the DV mode. We've got Mount Hebo in Oregon. Since we're here in Seaside, it's 54 miles away. Fortunately, we don't have anything real close by. But we'll go ahead and pick this one. You can see it's port C. We have KD7, REX, port B, port C, port B again. We'll go ahead and select that one. Now the top has the command unlink reflector. And I'm not using any memory channels to scroll through. I'm just changing the to and the from. So the 5100 expands even more, where I can do a local CQ, a gateway CQ. The gateway CQ is pretty cool, where I can pick any repeater across the U.S., Europe, Germany, Asia, Africa, and it tells, we'll go to the southeast, and I could use port B here for Brandon, K5RKN. There's a good chance you're going to be on that repeater. Now, look at what it's done to my call signs. My call sign N9JA, I'm using a 5100. W7GC in port C, telling it to go through the gateway, and now the command to go just to that repeater.
So this really made it a lot simpler. The first screen we saw there just allowed you to set up, I don't know if macro is the right word, but it allowed you just to throw in the information you want and then automatically assign it over here to the fields that are going to be used.
Yes, sir. Now, the 5100, and the 31, the 51, and the 7100 have this type of database already built in. For those that have the 880, the 2820, you can use the software to program in your call fields and your repeater fields to do very similar things with it.
Any of the newer radios are going to have this functionality right here.
Yes, and you can download updates from www.dstarinfo.com. They have a full repeater list on really all of the Icom radios, even the very first generation radios, where you can download the repeater information into it. Now, earlier we were talking about reflectors. We've got a section under here for reflector itself. I can unlink it, kerchunk, it unlinks. Go back to the reflector. I can link to one. I can direct input if I need to. But you don't have to do all of the touching. All you have to do once you have it highlighted is make the selection of what you want to do.
That really makes it a lot simpler. On the 880, I kind of have to think about it a little bit. But on this one, there's only just a few buttons I need, and I can do anything. Is that right?
Yes, sir. Now, you can kind of do the same thing with the 880. It's just taking the time to program, and I recommend using the software, whether it's our software. There's some freeware out there that will do it, and there's the RT System software as well.
So based on this, if you're brand new and you're getting into D-Star, any of these radios will work, but this one will probably get you up and running quicker. This one or any of the other current generation.
Yes, sir. The current generation will get you up and running, and the feedback that we get from the customers using the radios is what allows us to make these firmware changes in the radios to make them a lot more simple.